Welcome to All About Art. My name is Alexandra, and I'm an art historian, curator, and writer. Within this podcast, topics relating to art history, cultural policy, the art sector, as well as a large range of other art-related topics will be covered. Conducting critical discussions, having entertaining exchanges, or just enjoying some relaxing chats, All About Art is where you'll find it all. Join me in exploring and developing cultural discourse. Welcome to another episode of All About Art. In this episode, I sat down with Sneha Shah, Mumbai-born, London-based entrepreneur and founder of Curaty, an art advisory firm that offers bespoke curatorial services, art experiences, and rental and advisory for art across the UK and India. I asked Sneha about how she started her business and what it means to run a company that builds on the philosophy of mindfulness and spirituality in art curation and collecting. We cover so many bases, speaking about how her company has grown in the last 6 years and what it was like in the beginning as an entrepreneur versus now. We also touch on her work in South Asia, how it differs from her work in London, and so much more. Thank you, Sneha, for coming on the podcast. Before we dive into the episode, I want to take a minute of your time to mention that All About Art is on Patreon. We are mostly volunteer-led, but in order to cover running costs and other expenses, we make it possible for our lovely listeners to support us, ranging from £1 a month to the price of an oat latte a month, or on the higher end, the price of a Sunday brunch per month, depending on the tier you want to choose. If every person who listens to the podcast signed up for the £1 tier on our Patreon, we would be able to sustain the podcast while also having scope to produce episodes more frequently and expand our activities in demystifying the professional arts sector. So, if you want to receive early access to episodes and behind-the-scenes content, maybe you want to get some merch, or if you just love what we do and want to support us, I would be thrilled if you considered signing up. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes. Also, thank you to our sponsors at Synergy Associates, the art world tech gurus, for supporting this episode's production at their clubhouse on Pall Mall. You can find more about Synergy and their facilities in the show notes. And now, on to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Sneha.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
I would love for you to tell listeners about your background to start us off. Can you tell me more about how you developed your career? What did you study and what experiences did you gain in the industry?
So I started by making art. My career started quite young, I would say. I remember starting to paint, since I was kind of 7. I was introduced to art at a very young age, and I was very passionate about it. But I studied it first. I went for summer school right after high school for a month just to check. My parents were like, "Are you sure you want to go to art school, Sneha? At least try it out for a month." And I was really lucky that I got that experience because I had the time of my life. So I went to UPenn summer school after my 10th grade, and I had the best time. It was genuinely amazing to be immersed and surrounded by so many artists. And painting 24/7 just felt like heaven. And I knew that was the thing for me. So when I kind of finished my 12th grade, I did the IB program and I was majoring in art in that as well. And that really set a foundation for me, making me realize that actually, hey, this is really something I wanted to do. Now, I'm not an artist full-time anymore. So obviously there's a pivot there. So I went to art school and I really enjoyed that experience. I went to School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And the reason I went there is because it's one of the only art schools that don't require to declare a major. So every single student graduates with a different degree because you would choose what you want to study while you're there. So you could literally graduate with every single foundation class in every single department. When I was there, I took advantage of that because I took a lot of arts admin classes. I didn't even know that was a thing. Growing up in India, that's where I grew up. Art history is not a subject you talk about. When I discovered my first art history class, I was a writer when I was, since a young age. I loved it. And that for me was really powerful. The ability to take on art history. I kind of went out to intern at the museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, and kind of work on a show there for 3 years that was called Ireland Art on a World Stage. And it was like a blockbuster exhibition that was going to open on the year I graduated. So it was quite convenient on timing because I got to see the last 3 years of that exhibition from a curatorial perspective. And it was a loan exhibition. So I was working on, immunity from seizure, a lot of different aspects of it. And I really allowed myself to kind of fall in to that side. I realized actually, even though I love making art, there's this whole other side of art that I still enjoy. I even interned for Patty Guilford, who was in Chicago, one of Chicago's eminent art advisors. And kind of seeing the way she works with clients really inspired me, like the ability, like you're almost like reading their mind and finding them the artwork that they would love to have. And that made me realize, actually, I would love to be an art advisor. And I started dabbling a bit of that on the side while I was still a student. I went on in my final year, this university had a student-run gallery called Student Union Galleries, where students were elected to become the directors of the gallery. So in my
at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's such an amazing program that allows you to do that. And so I got kind of elected as one of the gallery directors, kind of responsible for communications side of things and the administration of the gallery. And that was such a great experience because we were 5 directors working with a team and everyone was paid. And we even hired students who would run the galleries for us. So it was my first, I would say, leadership in an art space experience. But it was so real and so incredible. We put on 20 shows a year. And so I got to really see every aspect of running a gallery. So when I graduated, I actually got a job in New York as the gallery manager of a gallery called Broadway 1602, which sadly no longer is there, but it was such a great program because, it represented some of the most amazing feminist artists like Marjorie Strider, Rosemary Costoro, just to name a few, who are now represented by Ropak and some Gagosian and some of the bigger galleries. But back then, they weren't even looked at. I'm talking about 2015. It's now a decade away, but it's not really that long ago if you think about it. So I really threw myself into my art career at a young age. After that, I kind of moved to India to manage the collection of the Bramall family. So I was kind of managing the Bramall Art Foundation and set up a team there as well. And we looked at how do you actually run a temporary museum program, but also a corporate art program. And that's kind of where I realized the power of art in the workspace. And that set the foundation for what I do now. But we still basically rotate exhibitions in the atrium of the corporate offices there. So we'd borrow art across India from different on loan from different collections. And we kind of curate this incredible program in the atrium. So I did that for a year, and I kind of realized that I wanted to go deeper into my own art history background because I had an art degree in the undergraduate, and I realized actually my career is taking a shift here. So I came to the UK to study at UCL, get my master's in art history.
So you did art history for your master's.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did an art history master's just to solidify it because I think I'm really glad I did because I think my writing and kind of setting that foundation for this side of my career happened there. And that gave me the confidence to start Curaty out of UCL's accelerator program. And that's what brings us to today.
Yeah, well, and that also brings me straight into my next question, which, you are the founder of Curaty, and it's a company that offers bespoke curatorial services, art experiences, and rental and advisory for art across the UK and India. And in preparation for this episode, I was reading an interview that you conducted for Metal magazine, and it describes the company as, and I quote, an advisory firm that infiltrates the philosophy of mindfulness and spirituality when it comes to art curation and collecting. So can you shed some more light on your business model and the company's mission, especially in relation to centering mindfulness as well?
I would say the business model and mindfulness aren't that integrated. Model is kind of a traditional art advisory model.
Okay.
I would say the mindfulness comes in the way we work with our clients.
Right.
It comes in the way that we have conversations about art. There's 2 ways, right? An art advisor. You have the art advisor that looks at investments, and what you're going to see on that decks is going to be stuff like the auction records, right? You're looking at the finances, the models. Now, for us, we do look at that when it comes to certain level and caliber of artworks. We obviously want to make sure that we're making the right decisions for our clients. But on the other end of it, we're also looking at, okay, what is the purpose of the art in the space? Who's going to be using the space? How does it kind of fit into the larger ecosystem of what's happening there? And how can we make it fit for purpose? In human design, in design thinking as well, I actually learned this when I was sitting in a class of how do you actually design the right product for in the startup accelerator, it was quite funny that, they use design thinking when you look at product fit. And I'm like, art is a product, and at the end of the day, why is it that when we're curating, we're always looking at themes, but we're never actually looking at the human interaction with the object, right? Like what happens. So what we're really trying to do on the spiritual side of it is saying, okay, if this is a room that's supposed to denote calm, how can we place an artwork in the space that has that kind of energy? What if it's a textile work that has that part of its concept versus, let's say a work that's acrylic or oil painting, right? That has its own energy because of the smells, etc. as well. But that's just the surface level. Now,
well, and I'm thinking because you just said textile and calm, it also has, depending on how big the room is, it will have an effect on how sound travels even.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. Exactly. So it's about thinking deeper about how art in a space exists. And the spiritual side of it is just knowing that there's, art is a spiritual experience. I think Rothko said it, when he was talking about his works. And he's like, when someone really connects with his piece and feels the emotions and allows them to flow, that's what art is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this moment that you get to just be and exist in front of and allow yourself to absorb what needs to be absorbed and move forward. It is a spiritual experience if you allow it to be. And a lot of people don't even know how to engage with art. And that's the tragedy. A lot of people walk around museums. They're not even seeing the work because they're just reading the labels and they feel like that's what the experience is supposed to be. And for me, that was a large part of it, is when I was building a firm, I really wanted to teach people how to engage with the artworks that they're buying. And that's where the spiritual experience comes in, where we literally just sit and we look. We look at the art. We ask questions, not just based on facts and figures, but based on what it's doing to us and how we feel about it.
Yeah, and that is perfect for my follow-up question, still on the topic of Metal Magazine, and something that you said within this interview that I found really interesting, and it was on the topic of advising, and it stuck with me. And that is, and again, I quote, "It's less about what will look good in the space and more about who the space is for." So how does focusing on your audience and approaching art as this expression of energy sort of manifest in how you actually actively conduct your work? I know that you said it's manifested, for example, in the conversations that you have with your clients.
That's such a good question, because so much of this is emotional.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it?
It is hard. Yeah. It is hard it's not a process. I can't just be like, Alex, if you do X, Y, Z, you will, cater this experience with your clients. I think a lot of it is also an energy exchange that I have with my clients in those moments. A lot of it is almost like therapy work, where you're in the room, you're reading each other's energies. You're really understanding, you're dealing with humans at the end of the day, my clients are humans and they have stories. And that's what I love, is picking into those stories and helping them create a space that truly resonates that. Now, that's whether they're corporate clients where it's about their brand, their vision, their mission, and understanding that and issues that they're facing in their team. Sometimes they even understand maybe there's some leadership issues, that can get more clarified through the artwork. Maybe there's more cultural issues, maybe we need to show the people that are in this office through the artwork and make their voice felt heard. Maybe it's the story of a family that's migrated from South Africa to the UK and still wants to connect to their roots. And maybe their collection is a homage to that. But even in that environment, these are just themes, right? For one of them, it's just we looked at beer bottle caps because it's a family that, loved that part of a braai and opening up a beer bottle, but also knowing that they're saving waste. And that's a huge part of this conversation, kind of curating a collection that shows these nuances and stories that are so for them, because that's what great collections are. If you look at the ones great collections of history, they're so personal, and that's what we get passionate about. And that's why we do what we do in the arts. It's getting out that passion, that feeling, which I hope I do with all the projects that I touch and the clients that work with me. And that's where even the spiritual aspect comes in, because spirituality is not religion. Spirituality is so energetic and it's so much more personal. And I feel like that's where a spiritual and mindful approach comes in.
Yeah, I feel like that really resonates with me as well. And I think it might be resonating with a lot of people who work in the arts and who we often have these conversations about how the work that we do is so inextricably linked with our personal selves, with emotions. You know, a lot of people have difficulty having this like work-life balance, or a lot of people, the friendships that they make are so linked to their jobs. And it is because it's an incredibly emotionally personal sector, but that's also what makes it so rewarding. On the flip side of things, and I'm kind of going off script here, but thinking about the very more analytical, structured side, can you tell me more about the UCL Accelerator and how that made a difference for you in launching your business?
Of course. When I was thinking of launching a business, I wasn't actively thinking of launching a business. I went into a competition at UCL at the Accelerator, where essentially I can't even remember, I think 300 startups, something pitched for a certain number of spaces in the Accelerator program. And Curaty was one of the ones that got chosen. And that was a moment where I was just like, okay, so I'm going to be doing this for the next 2 years. What was great is that in both my degrees, I never actually got a business foundation.
Well, yeah, because you studied fine art and then you studied art history. You don't get any sort of like business acumen guidance, anything in those degrees.
No, you don't. I'm lucky to have a family that's in business that kind of grew up around business language. But honestly speaking, like it was getting those basic classes. They have a launch program and like a program that was about scaling the business as well. So kind of going through those kind of really helped me think about, okay, what is this business I'm trying to build? But also like thinking about how do other businesses think, so that if they're my clients, I can also understand some of these areas that they're working through. And how can I integrate that and kind of create more unique art programs?
I love that, because even if it's not fully relevant to you specifically, it is relevant because you're getting that wider viewpoint. You can look at it from that perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was also amazing just to be starting a business with other businesses, because being a solo founder is bloody lonely. I didn't know that. Luckily, I had some of my closest friends kind of encourage me early in the start when I was kind of starting off. I was really surrounded by a good support network. I think that really made it easier to kind of get started. But honestly, like even now, I'm such good friends with so many of the startups that came out of the UCL Accelerator, because we all was in the same boat, fighting the same battles, trying to kind of get clients on board. It just felt nice, even though I wasn't the only art startup, which is also a tragedy, because I think that tells you so much. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to do it. It's just that you don't have as many art historians launching businesses. I think that's something that we realize in terms of innovation in the art industry. Why are we lagging behind when it comes to innovation? Is because even though we have so many businesses, they don't think like businesses. We think we're artists running businesses. And so just having more of a commercial mindset, but also an attitude of growth and innovation towards what we're doing. And I think for me, that was an eye-opener, and realizing that actually I wanted to be at that pivot point where I could be on both sides, a startup, but also on the art side. And that's how I started building it pre-pandemic, was really thinking of it from an innovation. Because I started my business 9 months before COVID, and we were curating artful workspaces when we launched.
Whoops.
Not something they told me to put in my SWOT analysis, that businesses were shut down for 3 years, literally. But
I love that. I mean, I don't love that for you, but I love that you're like, okay, SWOT analysis, threat, COVID.
Legit.
Which you never would have thought that a global like who would think in their SWOT analysis that you put a global pandemic? You know what I mean? It's like I remember I did my master's degree during COVID from 2020 to 2021. And I did mine in arts administration and cultural policy. And part of my master's degree was to create a business plan for an arts organization. And the arts organization, it's one that's local to Deptford, which is where I studied. I studied at Goldsmiths, and they provided all their accounts, their books. Like they opened up everything, and they had one of their board members come, and like we could ask the board member questions, and they provided all this info. And basically it was like putting together this business plan. But I just remember, thinking about a SWOT analysis and being like, so much of that business plan was focused on COVID, because it was such a shock, and it was something that, how do you go about it? And for me, it had obviously no consequences, because I was just trying to learn how to do it and get a grade. You had an actual business that you needed to consider the very real threats for. So that must have shifted a lot.
A lot, completely, both internally and externally, and realizing the value of what I was creating, the power of art in a global pandemic. We saw that everyone took to art. We started drawing again. We felt like we had to express ourselves, like with the NHS as well, people putting up artworks. I call them artworks. They'll be like it's children's drawings, but they're artworks, against the windows as a sign of solidarity. We saw how art can bring communities together. That's the bit that was exciting about it. It was for the first time, I think a lot of people awoke to the power of art in their lives. For me, as a business as well, it made me realize the power of what I was doing was not just for workspaces, but so much bigger than that. And made me realize I have to expand. So we started doing residential. And that's when I kind of realized actually like within families and kind of curating art in that space, itself is so impactful. And launching our e-commerce platform where you can buy art by emerging artists as well. We did that in the pandemic as a way to give students that just graduate from degree shows a platform to show their work. We did a VR exhibition as well in the pandemic, kind of playing with technology and kind of seeing, okay, what happens when you do that. And then we had a few, we handpicked about 12 artists that had just graduated, and we put on a show called Resilience on Oxford Street at like Souk Spaces. They were like a startup creating these pop-up exhibition spaces at the time. And even that was so powerful because we still had people with masks lining up outside to kind of see the show. And I mean, we were a young company. Like the fact that we had people lining up to see the show at a moment just made you realize the power of culture.
Yeah.
And how we just wanted to be a part of community again.
Yeah. I mean, we all sort of noticed, I think, the power of cultural expression or creative expression during the pandemic. I think that was something that a lot of people found their way back to, which was really, really positive. And as soon as I had the opportunity to go out and see art in person, that was immediately what I did. I really missed it. I think although it was cool to have online viewing rooms and things like that, it just did not feel the same as standing in an exhibition and feeling the power of art. Kind of veering into a more, because you spoke earlier when we talked about the accelerator, you had all these different courses, and part of it was also how to scale a business. And I want to know more about the internationality of your business. So I'd love to know more about your work in India, as I'm aware that you spend a good chunk of your time there running the company, building art collections, and more. So how does South Asia differ to the UK in relation to art business and entrepreneurship?
I think there's layers to that question. So I would say I would divide it up. I think entrepreneurship and art are quite different in South Asian culture. I feel like the galleries that we have there have followed your typical gallery model. I think there's people who have tried to build startups in the arts, but not to the extent where you have Artsy, right? One that's like really succeeded in kind of creating an ecosystem of sorts. But there's a lot of innovation happening at the moment. It's actually a very exciting time in India, I would say, right now, because there's a lot of people looking at the problems of legacy systems in terms of the fact that, like the modern masters in the West, we have a big modern Indian art movement that had happened where, it's the works that fetch auction records, There's a huge forgeries and fakes market that has followed it. So now we're seeing people thinking more innovatively about how technology can help with that and trying to create businesses and systems that are preventative for that. So I think there's a lot of other exciting movements happening in the space. We've even seen companies that have tried the art rental model, but that didn't really work in India yet because I think businesses are still kind of opening up to the idea of having art in the offices. So I think there's been, what's exciting is that there's been a lot of people that have tried different models. I feel like the India collector market is growing, especially when it comes to the younger audience. Like I know a lot of my friends who've just gotten married, getting their homes, now starting to think about art in their homes as well. And, in the past, we'd have this thing called Art Night Thursday in Mumbai. And when I say India, I have to be honest, I do concentrate a lot on Mumbai. For me, starting up in India was an organic move. It's where I grew up. It's a place that I call home. It's where my family is. So I kind of grew up in that art market and I love it. Honestly speaking, it's incredible to see the energy of art coming out of that city. I am so goddamn proud of it. GD School of Art, which used to be kind of like government-run school early in the colonial period, they've really, really upped their program in recent years. And you do see quality artists coming out of there. When I say quality artists, I don't mean to segregate and say that there's a certain level of art, but I'm really thinking about art that's conceptual, which for me is art that with intentionality versus art that's a copy. And that's why I say quality. Quality is where there's a level of originality, where you're not just using skill, but you're really going beyond that, right? Where you're looking at art for art's sake, where you're thinking about this, how can I use my skill and level it up so that, this is actually my signature style. And I'm talking about something that matters to me, that's good art for me. And I'm so proud of seeing the quality coming out of the local art schools. And so kind of working within that space has been really exciting because the galleries are doing a lot of, exciting programs right now. We have a new art fair that's just opened in Mumbai. It's just finished its second year last year, and I think this year will be its third year. And I think even the India Art Fair is going to open a satellite in Mumbai as well, which is going to be really exciting. I think this is the year that they're going to launch that. Yeah, so there's a lot happening in the city, which makes it an interesting city to participate in. Now, a lot of collectors are also looking to learn. It's not just collecting for decor. They want to build a relationship with art, which is why, I enjoy having a base there and working with local collectors. It's also really cool because there's a lot of older works. Like India has a law by which you cannot export certain works by certain artists that were really eminent pre-independent India. So there's a lot of older works and even Mughal manuscripts that have now come back to the country. So I had an exciting project where we were trying to conserve this manuscript against India's humidity. And projects like that I guess I just don't get here in London makes it so interesting. So we kind of create a whole conservation plan around it, got it set in a museum level box with humidity and earthquake monitors and we built this entire thing for it because it's such a valuable manuscript that needs to survive against Mumbai's humidity and drastic change in temperatures. And that's the thing, when you're kind of working in a city like that, there's so many layers to it.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps me energized, having a variety of projects, working with incredible collectors, and kind of seeing these unique objects that people want to surround themselves with. And the fact that we as humans are so territorial that we want to surround ourselves with such things.
Yeah. I think you have sort of half answered this already because, you say that you're from India, it's your home, Mumbai is where you grew up. But when you decided with your startup to expand internationally and specifically to India, was that a part of it from the very beginning? Or did you make that decision later on to actively do it? What sort of puzzle pieces had to be in place for you to do that?
To be honest, I launched in India at the same time as I launched in London. So in 2019, July, I would say we launched with our first UK client. And then in October, I had an exhibition in Mumbai with a British and Indian artist at a local gallery there to kind of launch Curaty India.
Thinking back to the beginning, what actually led you to venture into entrepreneurship? First off, when you said, you went into this pitch event for the accelerator program, what led you to even think about doing that? But then also, how did you sort of prepare for it? And how were those first years working independently? You said that it was actually quite hard for you in the beginning and quite isolating.
Honestly, I was angry. When I looked at art businesses, when I looked at salaries when I was going to graduate, I was like, if I had a good job in the UK, what I'd be earning. I was just angry. I was just like, this makes no sense. Why is it the arts is so undervalued and underplayed in that way? Why is it that, there isn't innovation? When I went for the pitch, there was not another art business there. And even in terms of what drove me to go for the pitch was genuinely, I see entrepreneurship like art making. It's the idea of taking something from idea stage and creating it into something tangible. And that excited me. I knew I wanted to do it at some point in my life. And I thought going through the pitching process would teach me some skills in business. I was always pretty business savvy. Like I mentioned, I'd done the galleries before. I kind of built a team before in the museum, and then I had a bit of commercial experience already. So for me, it was just kind of more of an organic move as well. It was kind of exciting because I was in university again and I wanted to really throw myself into that university experience.
Yeah.
And it felt like building a business was a class. It took away that fear for me. Like, it made me feel like building a business was a very natural and organic process. It felt like play, honestly. I think being an accelerator took away the seriousness of what I was doing, like when I got there. Because, to register a company in the UK, I think you just pay £10 on Companies House, and then suddenly you're like a director of a company.
Yeah.
When you go through the process.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes away like until you get like that big fat book that says you're now a company director and these are your rules and responsibilities. You're just like, like it takes away that fear of that book being like, oh my God, what have I just done?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, I know. Yeah.
That first moment. So for me, that was a big part of that initial process of kind of setting it up through an accelerator.
Oh, what were those first few years like working independently? Because you said that they were quite isolating or lonely as well.
Oh, yeah. So no, when I started it pre-pandemic, I wasn't isolated or lonely because I was surrounded by friends and people that just wanted to help because I was starting something new.
Yeah, you said you had a good support system.
Yeah, I had such a good support system. And that was pre-pandemic. We launched with our first 3 clients. It was actually pretty great to have like an initial take up. It was only when the pandemic hit 9 months in that I think the isolation started, because suddenly I was made to realize that I was working alone, because technically like it's my company. A few of my friends, moved back to their home countries, because I think the pandemic kind of started this big global shift, right? Like where people started migrating at a pace that we haven't seen before at the same time. So that was a moment where I think I kind of realized that, hey, actually this is my baby and I'm kind of building it myself. And I really need to start thinking about the reality of what's happening around me. Because the accelerator as well, that was closed. So suddenly, like, we had these Zoom calls that I'd get into, but it's really different when suddenly you're just like working by yourself in your own head and trying to kind of create new business models. And that was the bit where I was just like, okay, I really got to know myself. But now in hindsight, I'm really proud of myself because kind of 6 years in, it shows me like, okay, fine, if I can go through that and come out still loving what I do, at least I know that I love what I do, like that I'm resilient through that experience. And it taught me a lot about myself and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I think everyone sort of went through, especially in the beginning, having to shift from being in person to then going to having these like online courses and things like that. I had that as well, but a lot of the time, not to say that the ball was dropped, but I think everyone, even university professors, universities, were all quite shocked in trying to navigate this brand new situation. So I was finishing up my bachelor's degree and I think it was affected, and I was also at UCL for my BA, and it was affected by strikes that professors were, and rightfully so. Like, I support their strikes, but I lost out on a lot of education. And then pair that with a third of my year being hit by COVID as well. And basically all it was, okay, let's figure out how to get your dissertation over the line. And a lot of people were also struggling with even researching, like, having to research for your dissertation and you couldn't go to the library, How do you access that? Yes, a lot of these things are digitized, but it's really difficult sometimes to figure that out, even in those little ways. And then having to pay attention. I remember sitting in Zoom calls and just thinking, oh my God, I feel exhausted. And I get up in the morning and then I just sit at my computer and I don't really go outside. And then you go out for your like daily mandated walk, right? I mean, everyone who's listening into this probably knows exactly what I'm talking about because we all had to go through COVID. It was a global situation, but being an entrepreneur during that as well and having those sort of worries, very fresh worries, that shows a lot of strength. And as you say, it shows a lot of, I almost want to say dedication, but it's not. It's almost like it does indeed show how strong your relationship is to the work that you do, with the fact that it stayed just as strong, if not stronger, as you continue during that time. We have talked about the conception of the company. We've talked about your education, all the different experiences that you've had. And you have pivoted in the past, both in your career as well as in your company throughout the last 6 years. And I feel like it's an incredibly useful ability to have in business as well as in the arts. So can we speak more about the importance of pivoting and how to approach it in the world that we move in today?
I love this question. Pivoting is like a magic wand. I think a lot of us forget in our moments, whether you're in a job that you have outgrown and are scared to move from, whether it's you're a student and suddenly you're dealing with a new life after you've kind of graduated, or you're an entrepreneur that's been building something for 6 years and have suddenly kind of realized that actually what next in my career. What I love about pivoting is that it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking with a growth mindset and realizing that your options are limitless. Strategically thinking about where you are as like the pivot point, and then thinking of opportunities of where you could be, and kind of actually the way I do it is actually I map it out, being like, this is where I am. And I actually write out what else is it that I want to experience, and how do I draw the line from where I am to that experience. And actually I write out the process. And for me, pivoting is a very visual thing. So even in the last year, I've realized that I still love making art. And I've actually had an art practice over the last 6 years, even though I've been building Curaty, that's been keeping me sane. And I realized that while I'm putting everybody else's art out there, I've been neglecting my own art career. And actually now for the first time, I'm actually thinking of, okay, how do I start putting myself out there again? I'm a poet as well. And thinking about my own creative processes and kind of publishing my own poetry and putting it into the world again, and realizing that actually I'm a dynamic person. It doesn't have to be this or that. It can be this and that, right? And thinking more in the and mindset for me has been a kind of a pivot where it's kind of like, I'm not just an entrepreneur. I am these different things as well, and allowing myself to have that as part of my career. And what they say is, once you've kind of gone deep and you've built one leg of your table, think of life as a table where you have to build other verticals to keep yourself stable, so that when one leg falls off or has to change, you still have 3 other legs that are holding you up. And I feel like that's the one thing the pandemic taught me, was that, I was a one-leg table. And when that table kind of broke, I felt a lot of that weight crashing on me. And it taught me to build multiple legs, whether that's relationships, whether that's other career opportunities that I'm interested in. I also mentor startups. I have other identities in the world that allow me to kind of learn and also expand within Curaty too.
How do you find the time to have these different identities? Because I think that's what I'm personally struggling with, because I want to build my vertical legs of my wonderful table that I enjoy. But right now, it almost feels like there's not enough time in the day.
Because you've already just pivoted. You just went from...
That's true.
you just went from having a full-time job to going on your own. So it happens in stretches. That's the thing. I think when you just pivot, it's allowing yourself the grace to let that pivot settle. You're building a leg right now. Let that leg get built. And when you're...
I love this visual.
Yeah. And when you're stable on those 2 legs, automatically, because it's part of the personality, you will find it within you. The key is not to force it, because that's when we hit you burn out, because you're creating too much change and not allowing your body to process that change. And that's why I feel like the mindfulness kicks in, where do it mindfully. Don't try to pivot at a moment where you're in fight or flight mode. Allow yourself to pivot when you're going from a place of strength, not when you're still dealing with the concept. It's like silly when you've just gotten fired to go on and start applying for jobs without thinking, without anything, just because you're in fight or flight mode and your body just doesn't want to go through that change. Instead, allow yourself 3 days to cry, process the change, and then say, okay, hey, let's look at this as an opportunity. I have a fresh canvas. What do I really want? And how do I apply myself towards that? Whether it's going on your own, whether it's starting something, because otherwise, you're constantly in panic mode, and that's not good for your nervous system. And not good for creativity either, because, when your cortisol levels are high, you can't be creative. It's so hard to be creative when cortisol levels are high. So you have to be in that alpha state of being to make good decisions.
Yeah. I think what you said about being in a place where you feel like you're in a place of strength, like you're making these decisions not because you're desperately trying to find your feet, but instead that you're able to kind of do it with a sense of stability. And taking those 3 days to cry after something bad happened is really important, because that way you're processing those emotions. You're not just jumping from one thing to the next, kind of blindly panicking. And I think that's something I've also had to learn. But it's scary to pivot into the unknown and to have so many things going on and learning how to navigate those things. And yeah, I mean, hopefully my goal one day would also to be able to run a successful business while have other projects be successful. That's another leg. And then also be able to, mentor people, just like you said, you mentor startups. Like that's incredibly rewarding and really great. And having enough time in the day because, yeah, you've built, those 2 legs, and those 2 legs are built and they're strong. And then you can concentrate on building a third. I feel like I'm still kind of on like 1.5 wobbly legs, but I'm getting there.
I don't think so. I think there's a level of humility you're coming at it from. But I feel like there's also this moment where you have to take back your time. So if there is something that you really want to do, figuring out in your schedule, what is it that you're busy doing? Because I feel like we've popularized the word busy. And being busy means that you're important, and being busy means that you're cool. And I really disagree with that notion. Honestly, I feel like if I can find a way to work smart and run an art advisory firm working 3 hours a day and then another 2 hours spend writing, and adding to things that make my day worthwhile. That's something that I've learned for the last 6 years, is that you don't have to be busy all the time to run a successful company. Honestly, the smartest people in the world aren't busy all the time.
Yeah.
They have thinking time. They are, they know that strategy requires, some solace.
You need your mind space. Your mind needs that space to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if you're constantly in doing mode and literally like this executing, then that means that you need to change something in your schedule or in your routine or the way you're doing things so that you're allowing yourself to actually grow.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't grow.
Yeah. I remember, this is like such a small example, but it is an example of back in 2023, I got the invitation to come and speak at TEDx UCL. And I was really, really nervous about it. And part of one of the biggest things that was going on in my mind, of course, was how to memorize 15 minutes of text, but also, and be able to like recite it in a way that's engaging. But then another big question was, what the hell am I going to wear? And I remember panicking about it because I'm like, oh, this is a really big career moment and I want it to be impactful. I want it to also say something about me. Because of course, that is what we think about when we think about what we put on our bodies, especially in such a public moment. And I remember I had taken some time, I had cooked myself some food, and then I went to the gym. And I was having a particularly long gym session. And I was listening to music, but I wasn't, having any sort of other distractions. It was very much just having that mindfulness that we spoke about earlier. And that for me was sort of manifesting in that physical activity and that sort of solace with that hour and a half that I was being active. And then the idea came to me, like, I want to wear an artwork. How am I going to do that? And that was solely from giving myself even just 2 hours of not doing work, of not focusing on 10 different things at the same time. Sometimes when I am working out, if I'm doing cardio, if I'm on a machine that allows me to, I answer emails, or I answer messages, or I text people back, all of these things, right? And it's rare that I actually don't do that. And so for once I actually did do that, and I took the time, and that gave me this little idea that ended up making me feel really confident in my decision in how I was. I even brought it into the talk. I spoke about the artwork that I was wearing. I spoke about that everything that I was wearing was secondhand. And I was wearing the artwork that someone bespoke made for the talk. And it tied into my talk because my talk was on consumption, on consuming art instead of other things. So it was very relevant to it as well. And I probably would have just worn black trousers and a black blazer if I wouldn't have opened myself up a little bit to have that quiet time, to have that idea, for example. And so if we're projecting that or kind of translating that to the rest of business, what sort of downtime, I think, as you say, we almost have turned our society, or our society has turned the word busy into synonymous with being important. And I think that that is incredibly toxic, because I sometimes convince myself, like, oh, I took some downtime. Why is that not productive? Like, why was I not being productive? And that's such a toxic way to do things that leads to burnout.
I completely agree with you. And I love the way, you mentioned going to the gym and that process, right? Because what happens is when you go to the gym, your breath changes. You literally slow your mind down, and you allow yourself to get in an alpha state. So I think that also, like, the actions that we take, that's where mindfulness comes in, where it's allowing yourself, knowing that, hey, I want to actively shift, because these shifts are physical bodily shifts. So it's not just saying that, you know what, I'm not going to be busy for 2 hours and doom scroll Instagram. It's one of those moments of really changing your breath work, your physiology, so that you will, because, when you're engaging in thinking, it's a physiological experience. So I think that becomes super important as well. So it's good that you managed to do that while, you're working out, and knowing that this is something that's important to you, and carving out time and space to allow yourself that moment to really think through, hey, this is what I want to wear, this is how I want to feel, right? Because the alpha state of being that you get put in is where that kind of internal heart, you can start hearing it, that part of you that is your identity kind of comes to life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So is that what that, because you've mentioned this a few times now, this alpha state of being, what is that particularly? Like, is that when you end up self-reflecting to the point where, like, you have that clarity?
It's actually like when you first wake up in the morning.
Okay.
When you're in a very relaxed state of mind before the day starts, before you grab your phone. That's the alpha state, where it's a complete relaxed state that your body gets put into physiologically, where they say, from that place when you start creating, you have clarity. It's why they say when you wake up in the morning, before you grab your phone, meditate, because you allow your body to stay in that state for a longer period of time and allow your thoughts, everything to get settled before you allow the day's panic and the windows, the doors of your life to kind of swing open. You allow yourself this little nugget of space. And that's where a lot of people get inspiration. It's what Agnes Martin would have called waiting for inspiration. When she was just sitting there on her chair and just breathing and allowing her body to just exist. And when we're exercising, when you're running on a treadmill, when you get in that zone of flow, that flow state is when your brain is like in this alpha state of being.
That actually explains a lot in terms of why I feel the way that I feel when I exercise and when I run and go to the gym and stuff. Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Honestly, like, that's the other thing I would say. It's just that exercise is as much, and working out is as much part of my routine as work is. Because, like, you need that if you're an entrepreneur, having a good exercise routine and having, because it boosts your serotonin levels, and it's just so good for you, especially when things hit the fan, making sure that you're consistent with that instead of just being busy all the time. Yoga and meditation also, and having a more holistic practice, whether for you meditation is visualization, which there's certain people that do really well. A lot of athletes would do that really well, where they can meditate and visualize their success before it happens, and that's their form of meditation. Or your meditation is breath work, where you're just focusing on your breath, and each one of us is different. There's a reason why so many artists had these practices. A lot of successful artists talk about spirituality in their work and their relationship to it, because it's such an integral part of our lives. And when you have a spiritual practice, you can't be busy. You're just someone that realizes the power of time, and you realize the busyness then leaves your routine. And you're so much more intentional about everything that you do, that you're not busy anymore, you're intentional.
I do have one final question that I like to ask all of my guests here on the podcast. And it is, if you could have dinner with one artist from art history, who would it be and why?
Agnes Martin. I think she had an aura to her in the work that she created, the silence within which she existed. I just feel like she'd be such an interesting dinner table guest. I don't know if words would be exchanged in that dinner, or we'd just be sitting and looking at each other. But in a way, maybe like Marina Abramovic had that.
I was just about to say that. I was like, oh, similar to the artist is present.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just start sobbing as you stare into each other's eyes.
Yeah, maybe. I just think her work and her presence has brought such a shift to art history as well, that she'd be someone that I would love to just share space with.
Yeah. Well, Sneha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your expertise, your experiences, your opinions, your insights. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. This was so enjoyable. Thank you.
And that is it for today on All About Art. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or a review, as it helps more people discover the show. Also, feel free to share with your friends, or if you share on social media, tag me and get in touch. Thank you so much for listening.